Welcome to the Low Demand Parenting Podcast, where we drop the pressure, find the joy, and thrive, even when it feels like life is stuck on level 12 hard. I'm Amanda Diekman, author, autistic adult, and mom of 3. I'm not here as an expert, but a fellow traveler. Together, we're learning how to live more gently, authentically, and vibrantly in this wild parenting life. Hello and welcome. I am really excited for this conversation with some folks that I consider real partners and a family that is most similar to ours in terms of how we're going through this low demand parenting life. So Lindsay and Daryl Flanagan are here. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much for having us.
Can you each tell me a little bit more about yourselves and your family?
Yeah. So we have 2 boys. They are newly 8 and 9. And always just knew that our older son was wired differently in a good way. He needed different things. At least for me, I spent a lot of time trying to make traditional parenting work because I felt like that's what I needed to do. And I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time, and Daryl worked out of the house. At some point during the pandemic, things just came to a head and we realized it wasn't working and we were miserable and our kids were probably miserable. We started doing things differently. We started doing them more intuitively, and eventually he got an autism diagnosis and we found PDA, and that really aligned. And it's not been completely smooth sailing, but I think it has changed our lives to have a more low demand family and lean into more what our kids need. And yeah, we haven't looked back. What do you think?
So Daryl Flanagan, Lindsay's husband, AKA her cross to bear. I echo everything Lindsay just said. So maybe just to add on a couple things. One is, I guess, self-identify as being on the spectrum. Say that correctly?
Yeah, you identify as PDA, autistic as well, like our son.
Thank you. And also, I have the diagnosis for ADHD. So on top of that, looking at our oldest son was always looking into a mirror for me. And so I would tell that to Lindsay all the time, still do. But I had some survivorship bias going on where I ended up okay through more traditional parenting. But actually, I think as we look back at how my parents parented me, I think we see some signs of low demand parenting in there. But it wasn't entirely low demand parenting. I'm thinking mainly the fact that my mom especially would handle a lot of the executive functioning stuff for me. Like, you're going to eat this, you're going to be here at this time, do this at that time. But I kept telling Lindsay, he'll be fine, I'll be fine, I'll be fine. You get to a point where it's okay, this isn't working. And Lindsay had done a lot of research and come to me and said, I think we need to change things up. And I'm like, what's happening right now isn't working. I trust you. Let's give this a shot. And I guess so the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. We're going to hone in for this conversation on your relationship, but it's so hard to disentangle that from our parenting journey. There's just so much passing back and forth around parenting. So just to say that we don't need to disentangle those two things, like partnering and parenting are one and the same in our families. But I want to talk specifically about dropping demands for each other and for your kids. What have you learned about dropping demands for each other that you didn't know maybe in this earlier phase in your relationship? And how did it change things when you started letting things go instead of holding that high bar?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
I think it has been a more interesting journey than it is with kids to look at low demand, because there's so much societal pressure on how to parent kids, but there's even more societal pressure about how to be an adult, right? And what that looks like. And if you're not maybe performing to the level that people think you should as an adult, then sometimes it gets assigned negative intent, which I think I've been guilty of at times, not recognizing, just like with kids, that humans have different capacity as well. And it's not necessarily an issue of not wanting to be hopeful or not doing as much work as one person, that maybe it literally is just that they're working to their capacity. So I think that's been an interesting part to untangle, but then also try to make sure that both partners get their needs met, and that even someone who is neurotypical or not autistic obviously has capacity as well, just as has limited capacity just as a human being. So how do you like constantly do that dance and communicate with each other to make sure everybody gets their needs met and feels like they have some space for themselves as well?
It's something that just requires pretty consistent, generally speaking, daily communication back and forth. I'm trying not to be hyperbolic here and say, because it's not like minute to minute, second to second. That's a little bit ridiculous, but it is probably daily. Sometimes it's even hourly, where we're checking in with each other and asking, how are you doing? How are things going? I think we try to work off of each other's physical cues, verbal cues, understand where each other's at in that moment. And especially when things heat up, just, okay, is this time for me to back off, or is this a time for me to interject myself? And that's maybe the most challenging aspect, I would say, is that when is this time for me to jump in and help, or is this time for me to back off because my interjection will make things worse? So
Yes.
and then it's about doing like the Monday morning quarterbacking after the events have happened too, I think, where we're like, okay, hey, Lindsay, in this situation, as someone who self-identifies as PDA, I would recommend this instead. Or, hey, Daryl, I know you have PDA. I felt you got into what we call story mode right here. You lost your temper. Next time, please try to walk away from the situation. Go upstairs, go in your office, take 5 minutes.
Can you tell me what story you said you call it story?
Some people also call it like future tripping, or like you're just not in the moment, which is just, it's so hard to do just as a human, just in the moment. But Daryl's really good at pointing it out to me, where I'm like, if we don't do this, then this could happen. And everything is terrible. And then how are they ever going to be successful adults? Like the same things you hear over and over again in teaching people how to do low demand parenting. But it's just our nervous systems getting activated, parenting, or just making decisions from a place of fear of what could happen rather than of logic. And I actually used to hate when he pointed it out to me, but it's been really helpful. As I say, I think you're just in story mode right now. And it's just a good check in to me that maybe I'm jumping into fear.
That's so interesting. My husband and I have a lot of those kinds of phrases, like shorthand for the patterns that we get caught in. This is something as an autistic person that I find really grounding, is when something has a name. And then I'm like, okay, I know what that is. So any pattern that we get into, I always name it. But something my husband is really good at is adding humor and lightness into things. And so he'll usually rename it something silly or something that makes us both either laugh or be able to like banter a bit. And I wonder about that as a technique, as a kind of like a habit, which is not something I, until this moment, have consciously named, that we always give painful patterns a third-party name so we can both look at it like, oh, there's that thing again. Instead of you're doing that thing, it's like that thing is happening. Does that resonate for you guys? And are there other habits or practices that you find yourselves relying on to stay aligned?
I think humor is a really good one. Humor is just a sign of a relaxed nervous system, right? And Brooke from No Pressure PDA said something in a webinar we were in with her a few months ago that has stuck with me forever, because she is PDA herself. And she said she really appreciates humor because it signals to her that nothing that's going on is so serious that we can't laugh about it. And I think that's such good perspective when you have a stressful life, or even just like one situation feels so stressful and so high stakes. I do think it's a way to signal safety to each other if there can be some lightheartedness or humor about it.
I think personally, it's really important in the midst of the lives that we live that Liz and I find time to connect. It's not probably going to be every day, but maybe every few days or at least every week that we connect on a personal level, and that we're able to have conversations with each other and just be there for each other. And so I think the humor can be the stuff that goes on day to day, but we still need time to just love each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you guys do to communicate in low demand ways that still get your needs met?
I would say most of our communication is texting. So we have probably not an uncommon situation in a lot of families that maybe uncommon that both of us mostly work from home. I work out of the house 2 days a week and our kids are home educated. And so we're all together all the time, which has pros and cons, right? So even though we're in the same house, like almost 24 hours a day, like you said, there's not a lot of space to talk if your kids are dysregulated by the split attention, or you obviously don't want to talk about your kids and their struggles in front of them. We do a lot of texting.
We mostly communicate our mood via TikToks.
And we do send each other a lot of humor. We send each other a lot of funny TikToks.
I think when the children were younger and I was working outside the house, there would be sometimes I'd call you on the way home from work, I think, to try to get some of that conversation is. As our kids gotten older, they do not like us on the phone.
It's stressful for them to have me on the phone and split attention.
So texting will, yes, I echo what Lindsay said, a lot of texting. We'll integrate humor through that.
Have you found ways to verbalize your needs to each other that don't threaten one or the other of you or make you defensive, that help you say, I need a break, or I need more attention from you, or I need more support, or whatever that is? How do you bring those things to each other?
I think about years ago before we even had kids and we used to get up and get ready for work together in the morning. And I just wake up ready to talk nonstop. And he said to me, I don't remember the words, I really love you, but it's a lot for me to talk in the morning. Would it be okay if we just got ready and then talked after work? And at first that was really hard for me because I just wake up ready to go. But that was really good feedback that it was just too overwhelming for him in the morning. Similarly now with kids, like you don't like a lot of conversation when you first wake up, just like our PDA kid, and has given me that feedback. And that has been helpful for me to know. Similarly, so I have ADHD, so I'll just walk into his office and start telling him a story or asking questions. And you gave me really kind feedback. Could you just ask if I'm free or ask if I have some time? And he always says yes, but just I think giving him the option to engage in conversation has been really helpful.
I feel like Lindsay has poured out so much time into helping. She put herself last, and I think many primary caregivers, moms in a lot of relationships, but generally speaking, primary caregivers, put themselves last in a relationship and in a family. I think that's not uncommon. I think that for us, the pendulum shifted too far in the other direction. I have ADHD. I had PDA. I own my own small business. And if you never got in my way, I would work probably 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, total tunnel vision, hyper focus. I needed to shift that back around and give her some more support. So I've been trying to do that more here recently. And I just want to point that out for people, because for anyone who may watch this and feel like they're in a similar position, there needs to be some accountability. If your partner is not the primary caregiver, and or if your partner has PDA or self-identifies as autistic, and or self-identifies as autistic, and or has ADHD, that it doesn't absolve them of all sins or of all responsibility here. It is important. You're in a partnership, right? You're in a relationship, you're in it together. And the focus should also go back on that person, make sure they're okay. And so for me, that's been a lot of hard listening. And it's taken Lindsay 2, 3, 10, 100 times to tell me some things. Please do this. Please, that would make my life so much easier, Daryl. And it's little things that I don't perceive as being like needle movers that apparently make her life easier. And so I need to focus on doing them, and carving out time from my day to do that.
It has made me feel seen and heard to say, I just need help. And this is so hard. I know it's hard for you too, but no relationship is going to be 50-50. I think that's unrealistic. But yeah, I felt like I needed the needle to move closer to center. And it's taken a lot of conversations, and I don't know.
But you have to do it in a way that doesn't trigger my demand avoidance. And I think that has been the most challenging aspect of this. There's one thing that hit me with the ad hoc demands, other to say, I really need you to carve out 30 minutes to an hour of your day now to insert thing here, do the dishes, cook, clean, run a vacuum. And I think it's taken some time to work that into our relationship and work that in without triggering a threat response from me and without me looking at it like in a very black and white way of saying, shoot, if I work another hour, I might be able to make $100 versus like doing dishes and vacuum. Yeah. Like we'll hire someone to do that stuff. He doesn't make dollars and cents. So why would we do it? So I think you shared an article at one point that kind of talked about how, at least from my perspective, and the articles written by a man for a man in like a cisgender relationship, that I don't have to understand the why that she asked me to do something. And a lot of times I think I try to interpret the value of it. The bottom line is it's important to her. I don't have to logically make it out to be important to me in order to do it.
Nice of you. Appreciate it.
Where are some of the places that you feel like you're still growing, or something that you haven't quite figured out yet, but that you're in process of figuring out? I just think it's helpful for us to acknowledge that no partnership is perfect. It always takes a ton of work to love someone else well, and that we don't have this figured out.
Thank you too. I mean, Lindsay's perfect for it all. This is really conversation is all about me and my flaws and where I need to get better, man. I'll just be upfront.
I know you're being funny, but I will struggle sometimes with always assigning positive intent. There may be some circumstances in some relationships where there's not positive intent, but I do know his character and his heart, and I know that he has good intentions. But when life is stressful and you don't have a lot of time to yourself and there's just a lot to manage, I think it's easy to slip into and do the dishes when I was at work today because he just doesn't really care how I feel, instead of just being like, he was with 2 kids who have a lot of needs for 10 hours while I was at work. So I think I don't think that's your struggle with me. I think that's my struggle, but I am always working on to continue to have positive intent, because when you can't, or you truly don't feel like your partner's coming from that place, and it's really easy to feel resentful.
One thing I'll throw out there that is something that I think I will struggle with till the day I die is keeping the PDA at bay, understanding my own PDA, understanding that our oldest who has PDA triggers me, and being able to keep that at bay long term. That is something that I'll ebb and I'll flow. I think Lindsay and I both know the scenarios where I'm vulnerable to having, I don't know the best way to put it, a negative behavioral reaction, or I don't know how you want to put it, an outburst.
Yeah,
bluntly.
just like being more reactive, like having your own nervous system. And I think it's so hard too. We've talked about, and I know a lot of other people can relate to this, that so many of us didn't recognize our own neurotypes or come to them until we had kids with similar neurotypes. And so then you really are like building the plane while it's taking off, because you didn't even know that was anything that you needed to address or figure out for yourself before all of a sudden you have kids that need you to do the same.
It's a never ending battle until the day I die. I'll always have to be checking myself to make sure that I'm not putting myself in a situation where I can fail. And it's a constant reassessment of, are you doing right by yourself, and then in turn doing right by your family, to put yourself in a good situation. And
I think when you say fail, you just mean be reactive, right?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. To me, that's failure. It's failure when I'm reactive, because you strive for perfection to achieve greatness. You will never be perfect. You strive for it to be great. And that's what I try to do with managing my own being a PDA-er. And on the other flip side of that, Amanda, it's for me to consistently keep the needs of my family and my wife like top of mind, because sometimes I think the focus can be so much on myself and my own PDA. If you're a primary caretaker in a family with a child who has PDA and a spouse who has PDA, you're in it. Like you are up against it. And I need to make sure that her needs are I'm always considering them, and that she's not leaving herself last, because that can end very badly with some burnout.
What do you guys think about the concept of fighting? Do you find that that kind of, sometimes you just gotta put it all out there with all your emotion? Or do you have rules for yourselves about how you would fight or what it looks like to fight? And do you believe in the idea of fighting?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that before. I, as someone with PDA whose traits sometimes come out behaviorally in a negative way with outbursts, I sometimes perceive the concept of fighting with a negative connotation, because my mind immediately goes to me raising my voice, me potentially being physically imposing, and therefore that could be perceived as being manipulative behavior on someone. And those are undesirable traits, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not. They're just undesirable traits and things that no one should do to another person. So my initial reaction is, if you're considering fighting, maybe raising a voice and maybe having a back and forth banter that is maybe a little bit more direct and cutting than a normal conversation. I am not a fan of that. What I am a fan of is having very direct and blunt conversations with each other, where we are very open and honest. And I think sometimes we talk about this, Lindsay, where we say, man, make sure we say what we mean. And don't just wait until we're mad at the other person for those real, like, be open and honest with each other before it gets to that point, because then you're going to have a hard time believing your spouse down the road when they tell you, oh, everything is fine. Yeah, the last thing you told me everything was fine. A week later, we got into a heated argument. An example. This is like a made up example. And then you actually told me, no, things weren't fine. So you want to piggyback off of that?
No, I think that's true. Yeah. And I think too, something we figured out along the way is the way we're wired, we have different thoughts about the outcome of a fight, or like what closure looks like, right? For a long time, like we would have disagreements or arguments and you would be like, I need to be done, right? Like he would start to feel like really cornered, like I need to be done talking about this till later. And I'd be like, I need closure on it. I want to finish talking about this. I can't go to bed without resolving this. But he was like feeling so activated, and that led to prolonging the fight or getting you upset, and like me just feeling, why didn't he want to resolve this? But now understanding that sometimes I need to be okay with letting him have a break because he's advocating for himself, right? That's what he needs. And that it might not be comfortable, but we just might need to come back to it later.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that's important as it relates to PDA, being a PDA, and that is activating the fight or flight response. So if I acknowledge that I have PDA, if I acknowledge that my fight or flight response can be triggered and how it can be triggered, if we're in the middle of a heated discussion, there are times when I can feel myself, Amanda, literally like visualize my mind and body getting back into a corner. And I know what's going to happen next if I don't get out of the situation. And so I will tell Lindsay, please. And I think it's just really hard, right? Because you want resolution, you want closure in the situation. And all of a sudden, abruptly, like in the middle of our discussion, I'm going, no, please, Lindsay, I cannot take this anymore, because, Amanda, I know that if it goes on too long, I might have a very large reaction, which can be hurtful to our relationship. And I think that is so hard for you, and I don't blame you for that. Can be so difficult to try to walk away. But I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's important. You're almost fighting with different rules with someone with PDA, and that might be perceived as being unfair in a way, but I do think it's important for the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for this conversation and for all of the ways that you are supporting your family and helping all of us to support our own by learning from your example. Thank you.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If this podcast is speaking to your soul, you can subscribe through wherever you get your own podcasts. Even better, if you feel the nudge, head on over to Apple Podcasts in particular and leave us a review. It's such a helpful way for new people to also get to experience what this podcast wants to bring into their lives. I'm Amanda. Remember, it takes great strength to let things go. I'll see you next week.